Hello and welcome to N=30, and N=30 is going to be another slightly different video about MvvmCross, and today's video is very much targeted at a very different audience, and the audience it's targeted at are people who want to take the core innards of MvvmCross and to abuse them in other ways. So in particular it's aimed at people who are writing their own MVVM frameworks, or their own MVC frameworks, or their own MVP frameworks, and who would like, or their own whatever frameworks, and if they would like to take MvvmCross's data binding and MvvmCross's plugins and use them, then this is the video for them. So just to give you a little bit of a background, this is a little bit of a presentation I wrote back in February or March, and it was about Hot Tuner, which is version 3. And what it was that in Hot Tuner we took the core guts of MvvmCross and we ripped it out into a separate library called CrossCore or Core Cross, and those guts are the trace, the plugin mechanism, the inversion of control, and some of the shared interfaces and concepts, things like MVX color and visibility. And we pulled them out so that they could be used in other libraries. Similarly to that, we then added binding, so that again binding could be used outside of MvvmCross. And this is what we called CrossLight. It was also called Chimp. It was called a project called Chimp. And the key thing is that you could use this, you could use Swiss binding, you could use all weak references without using MvvmCross. So I'm not going to go to slide 5, I'm just going to stop at slide 4 here. All of this here is usable without using MvvmCross. So let me open up a browser, because I think that's what we need. So let me get rid of this, not a browser, a code editor. One day browsers will be code editors, but they're not quite there yet. And let us create a new project. We're going to create this in N+1, and this is going to be called N30 Chimp, because it was Project Chimp or Chimp CrossLight, because it was called Chimp. This original project, it was called that so that it could be used. I can't remember what Chimp stood for, but there you go. That's what we called it. So we'll call it ChimpLight because it is the chimp of the future, and we're just going to create an Android project. You can do the same thing in iOS, but Android's where I'm going to start and where I'm just going to talk about today. And we're going to create this core module and cancel that. And then when we've created it, what we're going to do is we're going to leave it as is, but we're going to add as a reference. We're going to manage NuGet packages, and normally we go off and we do MvvmCross. And you see we pull back, normally we'll pull back this top package. But what we're looking for here is we are looking for a package called mvvmcross.hottuner.crosscore, and that's what we're going to add this time instead of adding the full MvvmCross. So we're going to install that, and what we should see is that it pulls in the portable support, and I don't think it pulls in much else. Let's just see. It does pull in binding, as you can see, but there is no assembly in this list called serious.mvvmcross on its own. So all of our MVX view models, all our MVX commands, all of the stuff about MVX setup, that's not available within this much smaller component set. So when you've set that up, what you're going to need to do is, first of all, let's just check that we haven't missed anything. So it does build. Hopefully that's going to build. Okay, so what you need to do is you need to go to the root, and what we're going to do is we're going to create our own kind of dummy setup. So let's just create a class that is going to be our own, light setup. And what we'd like to do is, let's put this in its own namespace so it's okay, is we need to provide the very smallest thing that is needed to actually set up for data binding to occur. And so what we do is we need something called Android globals. So let's pull that in as a, we need to provide this to the binding framework. So let's pull that in as an interface and support that. And what Android globals gives us, let's just show you, is it gives us an executable namespace. So that is just a way of finding out what this is, the Chimp Light. And that's really only used for actually locating resources, but it's a handy way of doing it. So that's what we do. So for executable namespace, we just implement it like that, just return Chimp. The next thing we need to do is find out what the executing assembly is, and that is obviously just my type getAssembly. .assembly, so there it is. And then we need to find out what the application context is. So that's a private set, so let's just add that to, we can either add it to constructor parameter or let us just set it privately. Because what I quite like to do is make sure there's only ever one of these light setups. So let's just do that. Let's just have a private constructor for light setup. So nothing else can ever call into light setup and accidentally create one. And then let's have a ensure initialize method. So public, actually no, let's just have a singleton. That's even better, isn't it? So public static read only, and let's have a light setup, which is an instance, equals a new light setup. So that's the way that works. And then what I'd like to do is I'd like to add a method to this, public void ensure initialize. So this ensure initialized, I would like to make sure that the very core of MvvmCross is initialized. And as I say, the very core, this little bit of cross core, is basically things like IOC. So to do that, what we can do is we can call MVX simple IOC container. Obviously you could use your own container as long as you write an adapter to pull that in. And let's just call that and get hold of the instance. Actually, let's just call initialize on it. That would do quite nicely. But we probably want to make sure, you know, it's an ensure, so let's just make sure there isn't one before we start. So if there is one, we're just going to bomb out. So if the instance, if the instance is not null, we're already initialized, so that's cool. Let's just return. So we've got this set up of that. Then we need to start registering things within there. So one of the things we said we needed to register was ourself, this Android global. So let's do that. Let's just do an mvx.regis. Just got a bit of import of namespaces to go. So we've got to register our globals, which is us. We also want to make sure that we actually set this application context. So let's add that in as a parameter here. An application context are just, you know, an Android, what's it called? Android context, isn't it? Or is it just context even? Yeah. So this is just a an Android thing, but it doesn't matter. So that's just setting application context equals context in here. And that just means we've set up all of our singletons. And then we need to set up the binding engine, because that's what we really care about here. So to set up the binding engine, what we do is we do a var builder equals new, and there's a class called Android Binding Builder. It's something that you won't have seen before in any of the N+1 tutorials, because normally this is hidden behind MVX setup and it just does it automatically for you. But here, if you want to create your own framework, or you just want a small binding framework for whatever reason, then you can just call it directly like this. And there's just one more thing you have to do, I think, in order to get Android Binding Builder working, and that is to tell it where, when it inflates XML, this binding builder, it needs to know where to look for things. Look for these like Android.linear layout and Android.text view and all those things. It needs to know where to look. And so to do that, what you do is you get hold of the view cache, which is an object that the Android binding builder creates. And to do that, what you do is you get hold of the view cache. So let's just do that as mvx.resolve. MvX view type cache, and what we're looking for is Android views. So we pull those in, and once we've got it, we just say, well, where you really want to look for views is in the assembly that contains, like, you know, all of your Android objects, which is the Android.widgets thing. So find a widget like any of these will actually do. Let's just find the linear layout. They're all in the same assembly, and then add it. And that will just mean that the program will go off and find this and add it to the view cache, which means when we do our own binding inflation, it will work. So that should be okay, light setup as is. And you can see, you know, it did take a little bit of explanation. There are these three properties that you need to have registered somewhere. You need to have some form of IOC set up. It doesn't have to be the MVX simple one, but it does need to be one that conforms to the MVX adapter. Basically, this has got an MVX IOC provider, which has, you know, got resolve and register and all those things on it. Once you've set that up and you've got it registered, then you can use a singleton to do this, to do the globals. You can create the Android binding builder, which internally will use this IOC quite a lot, and then you just need to tell it how to inflate things. And that should be it really for the infrastructure side of things on setup. But what you then need to do is adapt your activity so that it has a view model. So let's create a view model for it. And what type of view model shall we create? Let us create a person view model. Be kind of like person view model. And in order for it to be a view model, we would like to have an iNotify property change, because that's INPC, iNotify property change is the core interface that's used throughout MvvM patterns. And so let's implement that. And I won't let ReSharper add project annotations. But you can see what it does is it produces this onProperty change, which just has a string handler. It produces this event, and that is the core of iNPC, iNotify property change. And then let's add some methods to this. So I'll cheat and use my shortcuts, but I'll need to change them. So this is first name. It's my first one, because a person has a first name. And then I'll need to add another one, which is going to be last name. I will need to change this in a moment, but I'll come back to that. Last name. Last name. And then let's also create a combined one, which is a public string full name. And what that's going to return is string.format, curly brace 0, space, curly brace 1, first name, last name. And let us, so these raise property change, obviously you can't use those here because we don't have that expression-based syntax within our very simple iNotify property change. What we can do is we can do that we'd like to notify using strings. So here's last name, and then we'd also obviously like to add full name to that. And then let's do the same here. Full name, and this first one is first name. It looks like I missed a semicolon down here, so I'll just add that. And then what you can see is that is our full, that is our, what's wrong here? I'm not sure what's wrong with that. It's because I've got two inverted commas here. So what we have, sorry, is just a simple view model, which is just an iNotify property changed. It implements three properties: first name, last name, and full name. Let us just set some default values for these. So this is going to be our favorite Fred and Flintstone. And we've got an iNPC implementation. So we can move on now back to the activity. So this activity is going to become our view. Let me just put this in a separate file again so we can keep ourselves in some kind of order. So that's our view model, and our activity now here. So this is the default activity that's shown on screen, and you can see that what it's got by default is kind of this code behind stuff at the bottom. So the very first thing we want to do is get rid of this code behind. We don't like it. And let's get rid of this count because we don't need that anymore. And what we'd like to do is we'd like to change it from this basic setup here into something that actually is going to use data binding. So as a start, let us add here a data binding context. And so a data binding context is an MVX Android binding context. And what an Android binding context does is it wraps all of the complexity of binding. It wraps a set of bindings, it wraps the events that it's looking for on both source and target, on both the views and on the view models, and it wraps it in one place that can be easily created and easily destroyed. It can be changed when the data context changes, it can be updated, etc. So that's what a binding context is, and we need to create one of these. So let's do that here after we've called the base method. So we need to create one, and what it says as arguments for this is, first of all, it needs an Android style context, so we can just pass in the activity for that. Then it needs an iMvx layout inflator. So this is something that under the covers is going to do some of the inflation for us. So we can actually just create one of those from the activity itself. So let's just do that. Let's add an iMvx layout inflator. So it's this comma this. And then the final thing it needs is the source. And the source is the view model. So let's just add it. let's add a new, and it was called a person view model. I got a capitalization. So that's our binding context created. And now what we need to do is, instead of setting the content view just from XML and letting Android do the inflation, we ask our binding context to do the inflation for us. So what we do is binding context dot binding inflate. We pass it the resource we'd like it to use. We'll just reuse the one that Android has given us. And then we need to pass it a parent, and in this case we don't want it to have a parent because we're going to insert it. So what we do is we look at what's returned from the binding inflate, and we use that in the set content view. And that, I think, is all I need to do. No, there's one other thing that obviously I need to do, which is that I never actually made sure that setup was set up. So let's do late setup.instance.ensure initialized and pass in the application context. Yeah, so that's fairly straightforward to do. So this again should build at the moment. Let me just check. Oops, lost my mouse. Let's build this. Right, so that's built. What you need to do after you've got that building is just to go to layout and to values. And what we'd like to do is, in layout, we would like to add, just as we've seen with all of our other XML, we'd like to add kind of the namespace for our local editions. So this is XML namespace local, and we'd like to pass in res-auto for our local. However, obviously looking at this, there aren't any locals. There's nothing in here for our locals. So let's add a file which will give us our locals. And this is just the standard file that we want to add. So what I'm going to do is I'll go down to one of our standard ones. Oops, that's not one which has got Android in it. Let me just go down to like n=6 even. And in here we've got these resources, and this is available on the web as well. These MVX Android resources. It's very large. And let's pull them in. And these are the things that give us things like MVX bind, which is obviously what we really want. It also gives you the MVX template when you have lists, etc. So let us go back to our linear layout, and now what we should be able to do is we should be able to put in some fields. So let's do this. Let's do an edit text, and let us bind that edit text. Local colon MVX bind equals, and let us pull in that we would like that to be bound to first name. Obviously it's no longer a button, so I'll get rid of that. And then let's do another one of those, which is to last name. And then underneath all of that, let's put a text view, which is going to be bound to full name. Now, unless I've made some errors, which is perfectly possible, I think at this stage we should be able to run. So again, just to step through what we've got. We've got this very light setup, which is fiddly and technical. And this light setup, you would probably expect whoever's making a framework to provide a common one of these. And what it does is it sets up an IOC container. It sets up these very few Android globals, which are basically the executable name, the executable assembly, and the application context. It creates the Android binding builder, and then it does this lookup thing saying, please look up, views, widgets, inside the Android main assembly. If there are other assemblies that contain widgets, perhaps you've downloaded one of Cheese Baron's excellent assemblies, or perhaps you've created your own one, or perhaps the UI project has some views, you'd want to add those in as well here so that the view cache could know about them. And then once we've done light setup, we created a simple iNotify property changed, which is here. We created our activity, and we just changed our activity so that it used this ensure setup has started. It adds a binding context, which is where our person view model is the data context, and then it inflates the XML using that binding context. So enough talking, let's see whether or not this runs. Debug start new. The build has started. It's packaging the application, copies it across, and there is Fred and Flintstone. And if we start typing here, okay, my emulator has a bad thing, you can hopefully see that the data binding is working. Sorry about the keyboard, but you can hopefully see that data binding has occurred. So that's how simple it is to set up the data binding. Let's also just show that you can do other things here if you want to. So there is probably the need to add a command to the view model. So let's see if we can do that. So we need to add a command. So let's add a public I command. It's going to be a command, and this is going to be a reset command. And when we get this, we're going to have to return a new oh, there is an MVX wrapping command there, but let's just do a my command. And a my command, what is an MVX? I'm not going to go there. A new my command, and a my command is going to reset. So let's just do that. First name is going to be F, and last name is going to be L. So we're going to create a very simple relay command here, if you like, my relay command. So let's just do that, create the class, it implements I command, perfect. Resharper has not quite done it all for us, but it will any moment. And so can execute is always going to return true, because we like that. Execute, well, we've got this action passed to us, so let's use it. Action underscore action, let's do that. And we don't ever call can execute change, so that can just sit there. And then parameter we're going to ignore, so we're just going to call underscore action with brackets. So that's our my relay command done. And let's just see whether or not we can call that. So what we'll do in main is we will create a button. Let's just copy it above. So our button is going to be there. Let's put some text on the button, and the text is going to say reset. And then what we'd like to do is we would like to have that bound so that when we click the button, we would like to call the reset command. So let's see whether or not that works. Debug start new. And hopefully that's deployed and it's in the emulator. Seems to be stuck on deploy succeeded. Is it actually running? Give it another kick. Debug start new. Okay, so now it's packaging, etc. And now it's deploy succeeded again. Is it going to run for me? Saying there's a problem with that. Let me just check it's not a fast deployment issue. Been having problems with this emulator recently. It may be that I've got an error in my XML or something, but I'm just not sure what it is at the moment. So now it runs, and if I hit reset, then you can see that that command works. If I start typing, then obviously my keyboard's a bit ruined, but you can see the data binding is working again. Reset again, sets it back. So that is data binding working, and that is the I command working as well. So one final thing that I guess I'll add in this introduction demo to CrossLight, to this Chimp functionality at the core of MvvmCross, is let us also add a value converter. So let me add in here, you take my relay command out into its own method. Let me also add a value converter, so let's just do this. So we're going to add a value converter which is going to be called a length value converter. It's the one I quite often use for example. And I think I can use MVX value converter, or have I not got that available to me? Let me see. Okay, so I can use MVX value converter, and let me use the generic form because that's quite nice to use, go from string to int. And what I'll do is I will just override convert, and if the value is null, then I'll return 0. So that's the length of null. And otherwise what I'll do is I'll return value.length. So that's a value converter. Obviously we haven't got like the simple rules set up about where you should load value converters at the moment. So what I'm going to do instead is in light setup, because this is my own custom setup for this class, I'm going to create a value converter by doing this, by going to var value converter registry equals mvx.resolve. And this is going to be imvx value converter registry, which I can get. And then once I've got hold of the value converter registry, what I can do is I can do add or overwrite the name I'd like to give it. So I'm going to give this a weird name like the length converter. So this isn't following the conventions of MvvmCross, this is following the new whatever this project is. And I'm just going to pass in a new length value converter. So now registered, we will have a value converter called the length value converter. So if I take hold of that, Control C, and I go over to the main XML, and let me put in here, let me just put in another text view, and this text view is going to bind to full name again, but it's going to apply a converter, which is the length converter. So let's do that, and debug, start new, and hopefully that will work to the emulator again. It's building, it's running up, and then hopefully you can see there that we've got the 15 underneath. And if we change, Fred Flintstone to be, if only I had, to be FUD, can't quite find my delete button, and you can see the length changing, and if I hit reset you can see it changing again. So that is a very quick introduction to Cross Core and to the binding core module. It is a pretty rich set of functionality you get without having MvvmCross in there. It should mean that you can lay other binding engines on top, or you could lay other MVVM engines on top, or you can lay other things on top. If you need then to add plugins, then that can also be done. Shall I try and add a plugin? Yeah, let's do it. Let's add another plugin. So that was adding those things. Let me see if I can add plugins to this. So plugins are done again in setup. And basically what you need to do is you need to, after setting up your globals and after setting up your IOC, then you need to also register a plugin engine, a plugin manager. And to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to do var plugin equals new. And I think this is an MVX file-based plugin manager. So each platform has its own plugin manager essentially. And maybe it's not based, maybe it's just a file plugin manager. Okay, that's the one. And what it takes as parameters is it takes the name of the DLL postfix, which for Droid is Droid, and then it takes the assembly extension. For most platforms there's no assembly extension. For Droid I think it's .dll that we need to pass in. I may have to change this in a minute. And then once you've created that, you just have to register it. Register singleton. This is a imvx plugin manager, and this is going to be the plugin. Once you've done that, then I think it's as simple as, but I may be wrong. If you then want to use a plugin, let's say for example we would like to add, let's just do this, a manage NuGet, and let's add in, see what plugins we've got. Let us say for example that we would like to use a plugin like, who do I trust to use in this first sample? Something that would be easy to use is what I'm thinking of. Easy to use in an emulator is the real problem. I would like to use, well, let's try using location, but this is going to be a bit fiddlier than I was hoping. So we're going to use location, and let us use location by, so we've got our plugin loaded, and then we've got our plugin manager loaded, and then what I'd quite like to do is to get location plugin loaded. So what I'm going to do is, we can't really call this bootstrap on its own. we can. So it's added a location bootstrap. So what I'm going to do is at the end of my initialize of setup, I'm going to get hold of location plugin bootstrap, and I'm going to do var location bootstrap equals new location bootstrap, and I'm going to call location bootstrap dot run, and that I think should get the location bootstrapper to run on its own, and so that will just make sure that it creates one for us. And then what I'll do is in my project I will because in order to get location running I do have to give myself a my Android manifest. I have to give myself some permissions. So I'm going to add in Android find location and Android course location, and I'll hit build to make sure that's still building okay. Right, so that's built okay, and then what I need to do is need to add this to the UI somehow. So let's go to our person view model, and this is where the view model kind of idea of it being a person is going to break down. But let's just add a public location. So this is going to be, well, let's just add a double, a lat and a long. Double lat, which again I can just add as a get set, and then that needs to go to property with backing field, and I need to add an on property changed of lat, and then I need to do the same thing for long. So let's just do that. Long. And so this is long equals value, and then on property changed long. So this would enable me to get hold of my, I don't seem to have copied everything. Let's just do that. This will give me a lat and long into which to copy things into. But then let's in the constructor for this guy, which I don't have, so let's create one. What I'd like to do is get hold of a location watcher. So let's just do this. So we're going to do var location equals, so we're going to resolve it. MvX dot resolve MvX, I think it's a geolocation watcher, which is in that plugin if I'm lucky. And what we're going to do is location dot start, and I think that takes as its parameters some options. So we'll just create some standard options. A success, so on success, which will be on location, and an error, which is going to be an on error. Now our problem will probably be that we'll need to get this across to the UI thread, but we'll have to look at that in a moment. So I'm going to ignore on error, unfortunately. But on success, I'd like to find a way of getting it across to the UI thread. So the only way I can think of doing that at the moment, you know, this isn't cross-platform code at all, is I'm going to pass in my activity. Okay, this isn't nice code at all, but there you go. And what I'll do is I will store that activity here in my view model. You know, this is like a bit like if you were doing Windows and you were storing a dispatcher inside your view model. This is a bit like what you're doing here. So we're going to get hold of the parent, and when we get this on success, what I'm going to do is I'm going to call parent.run on UI thread, and this run on UI thread is going to call, oops, wrong place. This run on UI thread is going to call lat equals obj.coordinates.latitude, and long equals obj.coordinates.longitude, and that on its own should be enough really for this to run. So let me just see if that builds. Person view model no longer takes that, so we have to pass in our activity 1 to us. And then the other thing we need to do is change the UI so it's got these things on there. So let's just do that, and let's add a couple more text views. It's becoming a very arbitrary sample, but that's okay. So we're going to add a text view for lat and long, and this is lat and long. Let me just make these a bit larger so I don't have to keep zooming in. So this is text size is going to be 40 dp for both of these. So that's going to be pretty big. Okay, so in theory, that should be enough that I can now use that plugin. Plugins you might want to use across platforms are things like this location, or things like the email sender, are things like the picture chooser, but obviously there are other ways of doing it, particularly for a single platform. Things like the image view loader, which obviously relies on the plugin cache for downloading, and it relies on the file plugin. Those things are things that I can imagine you might want to use, so you might just want to pull those in by default. So let's run this up and see whether or not it works on my emulator. It's a scary moment. Okay, that's just an emulator fail. Let's try that again. Debug start new. So we deploy, and it's saying there's an unhandled. Okay, so it didn't pull in plugins.location_droid. Okay, so you can see, if you see the error here, you can see it was looking for something called location_droid.dll. That's wrong, and what it should have been looking for instead was something called location.droid. So it looks here like I missed a .droid, and if I try that again, let's see whether that does any better. Yeah, so this is not something I do every day. In fact, it's only written once in MvvmCross, but hopefully that's it. Let's see if we get it running this time. So now we're up and running, and you can see it's reporting lat and long as 00. If you use the Android tool monitor.bat, then this has got a emulator control panel, and somewhere down here, let's see if I can resize these things a bit better. Somewhere down here there is a location, so if you want to set the location to, for example, 145 and 27.4226, and we hit send, and you see that got through as lat and long straight to the emulator. So you know that shows you that your app is now responding directly to those things. Obviously, if you're not doing cross-platform, you might just want to code that up yourself anyway and not use the plugin. But for things like images, it would be very useful, perhaps, just to pull in those additional plugins, and then you can use MVX Image View. Okay, that was taking my life in my hands. That shows you using just the cross core. It shows you using data binding. It shows you using iCommand. It shows you using value converter, and then it also shows you using plugins. Possibly taking it too far at the end, but that's cool. And that is the central part of CrossCore. If you need more about this, it really is a technical area. There are some basic things out there. There is a demo in the examples folder called CrossLight in slodge MvvmCross/tutorials. It's definitely more for more advanced people, or for people who want to build their own framework, want to roll your own little mini framework. Go ahead and do it. Have fun, enjoy it, but do have patience with some of the questions you might ask, because it is definitely deeply technical. Hope that helps. That is N=30. We're really zooming through. And yeah, if you've got any comments about kind of less technical things you'd like to see covered, by all means do get back in touch. Excellent. Okay, there was one more thing I should have said in N=30, and it's quite an important thing. Which is when we were talking about the bindings and about the location provider and all that. Obviously, what I did was quite, throw it out together and put it on the wall. It is important to tidy things up after you're finished with them, and in particular with bindings, you really should try and dispose of them when your activity gets disposed. So one thing I should have added is that in the on destroy of your activity, it's a really good practice to call binding context.clear all bindings, and that will dispose all of your bindings and make sure that your views and your view models can be cleared from memory. Please, please, please do make sure you do that, because otherwise you can end up, particularly on touch, you can end up with some nasty memory leaks. So that was it. I just wanted to cover that as additions. Obviously, if you are also here in your person view model. If you are doing things with the location, then you'll need to work out your own management for how you actually bring that alive and put it together. Putting it into one view model is probably not a good memory model and not a good life cycle model. Okay, that was it. I just wanted to say that, and obviously, also with your activity, if that's going to be created and destroyed every time you rotate the screen and anything like that, then you'll need to work out, if you're writing your own framework, you'll need to work out how to handle those things. So that was it. It was just really to say, this block of code here, if you are writing your own framework, make sure you clear your own bindings. That was it. Cool. Sorry about that. It was just one little more thing. It was just one more thing. Okay, have a good one. Thank you.